Let's take a step back into the past and revisit a time when Nate Diaz managed to secure a victory against Conor McGregor. Now, we know the outcome, but how much do we know about the technical story? Now, if you practice combat sports, there's an important lesson that I mentioned later on in this video, so stay tuned to find out what that is. Now let's get started. Nate Diaz managed to stun Conor McGregor with a heavy shot, but how did he do it? To understand what went down, let me take you back a little bit further, back when Nate Diaz fought Michael Johnson. He completely dominated him, and this led to his infamous call-out of Conor McGregor.
Yeah, Conor McGregor, you're taking everything I work for, I'm gonna fight you. You know what's the real fight, what's the real money fight is me, not these clowns that you already punked at the press conference.
In that fight, there was a particular tactic that Nate used to punish Michael Johnson. Johnson's a very trigger-happy puncher, so as soon as you touch him, he's always likely to punch back like a bad man. And to deal with this, Nate would purposely jab at Michael Johnson to bait Johnson into counter-punching. Then Nate would pull away with his fading lead hook to punish him for it. Since Nate's arms are pretty long, he could effectively pull back outside of Michael Johnson's range and punish him, so he's able to hit him without getting hit. And that, my friend, defined the story of that fight. This is important to notice because Conor McGregor noticed this too, and in previous interviews he would often mention that all Nate does is hit and pull, so he anticipated that this would be one of the tactics that Nate would try to use on him, but he was ready to counter it when he faced him at UFC 96. Conor went as far as predicting that he'd win by knockout using an uppercut, but little did he know, this would ultimately become one of his downfalls, the ones that led up to this moment. The jab is a staple tool for a boxer, especially for one like Nate Diaz. He uses it to set up his strikes and set up his baits. Now, Conor anticipated that Nate would jab to try to bait him into attacking, so that he could fade back and counter with that lead hook. So he had his slip cross where he'd slip the shot and come back up with his cross. Then he had his simultaneous counters where he would time his shot as Nate threw his jab. Then next you have his pull cross where he pulls away and then throws his shot. And then to some extent he had success with the uppercut. These counters were crucial tools for shutting down Nate's most important weapon. You'd see several times where Nate would try to attempt to bait with the jab, but he just couldn't find a lot of success. Nate had too much trouble trying to bait and punish because he'd get caught even before he could try to execute his plans, and this is because Conor is very precise with his counters. For example, when he does a pull cross or some kind of defense, he only moves by an inch or so to evade and then counter. Sometimes his movements is just barely enough to miss. This type of precision is really important because in principle, the further you move away to evade, the further you have to travel back to counter, and I'll show you an example here. So pay attention to Conor's head. His head's at the red line where Nate's gonna punch. Now he's gonna pull his head back to the blue line there, and he only moves just about a head distance away, very precisely. Then from here he throws his strike back, right at Nate's face. Now he only has to move his head about another head distance back, and he's able to land his shot. If he were to move a little further, it would take him longer because he would have to move that much further. And here from a different angle, you're going to see him pull his head away back into the blue line. Now he doesn't have to travel that much further, only about a head length, to throw his counter right here. And you're going to notice that if he were to pull his head back even further, it would take him even longer to throw his counter because he would have to travel farther. And you can see in this image right here from the yellow line if he was to pull his head back a lot more. His distancing means he could fire his counters far sooner than what Nate can anticipate. And by being very precise with distancing, you can improve the timing of your shot because you're spending less time trying to make up that space. So this concept also applied to his uppercut as well. Now, Conor would slip Nate's jab by a very small margin and then he would immediately come back up with an uppercut counter. Nate's rhythm of jabbing and pulling away was quickly embraced with brutal counters, but Nate switched things up with one simple thing that turned the tide of the fight. Nate had tried throwing a lot of jabs to bait out while attempting to pull back, but he found little success. However, your failures bring you one step closer to success, and Nate eventually caught on to what he needed to do. It was clear Conor was fishing to slip and rip with his uppercut. Nate noticed what Conor was trying to do and he changed his pattern just a few moments later. So instead of throwing the jab to bait out, he threw his jab and followed up with a cross. This caught Conor off guard as he attempted throwing the uppercut, coming back up his center line. From that point on, Conor's demeanor changed drastically, and compound this with the fact that Conor had tired himself out, this diminished his sense of timing. This set the precedence for the rest of the fight, and you know what happened next? Conor couldn't really survive the relentless pressure, and Nate eventually took the fight to the ground to secure a rear naked choke victory. Now here's where I want to offer some technical insight as to why Conor's uppercut left him vulnerable. So this is Conor's center line right here. Now he's going to slip his head down to evade the shot. He slips very small amounts and then he comes back up right up his center line to throw his counters. Now this happens when he throws a slip and a counter cross or a slip or uppercut. Either way, he brings his head back up to the center line after evading that shot. In general, when Conor throws his uppercut, his head tends to be on that center line, so it's open for straight shots. And Nate managed to take advantage of that when he caught that pattern. He threw his 1-2 and caught his head coming back up that center line, right there. So was there any other option Conor could have used to avoid getting caught? Sure. Conor might have actually been safer if he had thrown his other counter variations instead. And if you look at his simultaneous counter, while he parries the hand, he tends to avoid the dangers of being on the center line. So if Nate were to throw a jab cross, Conor's head placement might have actually been in a safer spot like in this example. The important lesson you might take away from this is to use counters that fit the situation best. Now his uppercut worked well when Nate came low for body jabs, but pushing too much left him open. There are other counters that can offer you better defensive options, and it was pretty interesting because Conor's ego really pushed him the extra mile to fish for that uppercut and left him more vulnerable than usual, just to keep his word about his predictions of ending Nate with an uppercut. Conor showed some maturity too on his part. He took his loss in stride and he actually learned from it. The second time around, he didn't really allow himself to push for the uppercut as much. He used a lot more counters that made him less vulnerable, like his infamous pull cross. There were several components of this fight that led up to Nate's victory, but I wanted to shed some light on some interesting adjustments Nate made to change the tone of the fight by using one simple trick of switching up his pattern. If you want to see my full breakdown of this fight and the changes that Conor made in the rematch, come visit my WordPress page. I got the full article there of what I discovered. Thanks everybody for watching.